presenting our Week 10 graded assignment on system thinking habits for the course Strategies for Professional Growth. Today we have 9 presenters and 1 observer, which is myself. Each presenter here has selected one system thinking habit and they would like to develop and apply that particular habit in an academic project, professional, or other relevant context. The purpose of today's discussion is not to simply define these habits, but to understand how they can actually be applied in real life situations and how they can influence the way we approach problems and make decisions and what challenges we face while developing them. Each member will have up to 3 minutes to present their selected habit, explain the principle behind it, describe where they plan to apply it, and share the expected outcomes, actions, and challenges. After each presentation, we'll briefly discuss about the idea by sharing our different perspectives. As the observer, I'll coordinate the flow of the discussion, and at the end, I'll be summarizing some of the key habits, common ideas, and insights that has emerged from our discussion. I request everyone to please keep your presentation focused so that everyone gets the opportunity to participate. So we'll start with our presentations. We'll be starting off with Samir.
Yeah. Thank you, Neha. My my habit was, which I'm covering in this GA10, is see the big picture. The first systems thinking habit I have selected as see the big picture. So the principle is that we should not define a system only by what is immediately visible. We should ask how large the system is, what lies outside our current boundary, and what changes when we look further ahead in time. The three questions on the slides are system size, time, and the whole view. So, how much of the system am I including? What changes when I took further ahead? And what sits outside the immediate problem? This matters because a narrow definition can make a complex problem to deceptively simple. So, in academic and software work, a technical problem is often connected to people, requirements, technology, users, and long-term constraints. So the habit I want to develop is to pause before acting and widen the boundary enough to understand the problem properly. So key takeaway was is a better boundary can reveal a better explanation. And let me apply this habit to a software project that is performing poorly. The immediate reaction might be to blame the code or model, but I would widen the view. So first, if we look at the project at the base issue, the root cause, then the considered team and what are the roles and communication between the team is clear or not. We have to check that. Next requirement is that did we understand what users actually need? Basically, we have to list all the user feedbacks, user requirements. Then users are behaving as expected or not. And then finally, if all points are covered, then we have to look at the larger system, institutional, technical, or industry conditions around the project. This wider view does not mean ignoring details. It means keeping the important details while also seeing relationships around them. So, the question I want to carry forward is what am I missing out? Missing outside the immediate problem. That question can prevent us from fixing symptoms while leaving the real system unchanged. And I will use this as a short checklist before major project decisions. Now, I am giving mic to Saqib for his presentation.
Thank you, Samir. Before we move on to Saqib, if anyone would like to comment on Samir's presentation, you can do so now.
Yeah, so I think the point about widening the boundary is really useful. If we look only at the immediate issue, we might end up fixing the wrong thing. In a project, for example, what looks like a technical problem could actually be related to the team, requirements, or even the users. So I think this habit is basically a reminder to step back before jumping into a solution.
Thank you, Priya. Next, we can move on to Saqib's presentation.
Yeah, so thank you for giving me the opportunity. So my selected habit is surface and taste assumptions. This habit recognizes that our first explanation of a problem is often based on assumptions we have not examined. So the process has three modes. The first one is air surface. We will write down what I am taking for granted. Second thing is taste, tasting it, like challenge it with the evidence, data, feedback, or another perspective. And the third thing is to reframe it. If the evidence disagrees with the original explanation, we have to change the explanation instead of forcing the evidence totally. So this is especially useful in technical and academic work because we can become attached to the first diagnosis. Suppose if an AI project performs badly, we may immediately say the model is the problem, but that statement is itself an assumption. So the question I want to develop is what I am assuming and how can I take it. Next slide, please. Yeah, so consider a project that is underperforming. Instead of assuming the model is the problem, I would check four areas like we have data, model, metric, and user behavior here. So you have to see if the data representative or not, and the model really the bottleneck. Does the metric match the actual goal or not? So are users behaving as expected? So then I gather data or collect the data or feedback and look at the evidence. If the evidence supports the assumption, I continue with more confidence. If it contradicts the assumption, I reframe the problem. So my practical habit will be a short assumption check before important project decisions. So the takeaway is for don't ask only, and we have to ask the question what should I fix and what might I be assuming. So I'm over to the Kashan.
Okay, thank you, Saqib. If anyone wants to add anything to his presentation, they can do so. Okay, so next we'll move on to Kashan.
Thank you, Saqib and Neha, for inviting me. So my habit is consider issues fully and receive the urge to reach a swift conclusion. This does not mean every decision had to take a long time. It means we should pause long enough to understand the situation properly before deciding. There are three questions I want to ask myself. First, what do I actually know? This means separating facts from assumptions or first impressions. Second, what alternatives exist? Instead of choosing the first solution that comes to mind, what other options are available? Now, going to third, what could happen next? In other words, what are the possible outcomes of the decision? For example, imagine a team project is delayed. A quick conclusion might be one person is not doing their work properly. But if we consider the issue fully, we might find that the requirements were unclear, dependencies were missed, the workload was uneven, priorities changed, or even communication was not clear. So instead of blaming one person immediately, we first understand the facts, options, perspectives, and possible outcomes. Now moving to next slide. From history to careful from it. So this slide shows the shift from a hasty conclusion to a better decision. On the left, we have the hasty conclusion. We see a problem and immediately jump to a decision. But on the right, the system thinking approach is different. We first look at the facts, consider different options, listen to different perspectives, and only then make a better mindful decision. For example, suppose I have to select a technology for a project. A quick decision might depend on which tool looks most powerful or popular. But a fuller decision would also consider team skills integration, learning curve maintenance, deployment, and future growth. The same principle applies to team conflict. Instead of deciding immediately who is right or wrong, I can first understand what happened, listen to different viewpoints, and then decide what actually makes sense. So the three questions I want to carry forward are what facts I am missing, what alternatives have I not considered, and what perspective am I not hearing? If I ask this question before an important decision, I am likely less likely to react to only the immediate problem and more likely to understand the system behind it. Thank you. Now
Okay.
over to Priya.
Thank you, Kashan. Before we move on to Priya, if anyone has any comments, they can add.
Sure. I agree with that. I think when we are under pressure, especially in a project, it's very easy to just pick the first explanation and move on. But if we take a little more time to look at the facts and the different options, we might actually find a much better solution. And that also helps when we are trying to find a leverage point, because we first need to understand where the real problem is.
Okay. Thank you, Omji and Kashan. Next, we'll move on to Lakshmi Priya's presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Kashan and Neha, for inviting me. So, my selected habit is understand the consequences of action. The frameworks ask us about to consider three levels: short term, long term, and uh, unintended consequences. The short term question is what happens now. The long term question is what happens later. uh, the unintended question is what might not we not be expecting. So this matters because an action can improve one part of the system while creating a cause somewhere else or at a later point in time. In an academic context, I can use this habit when evaluating AI or automation. Instead of asking only, does this save time? I would also ask what skills may change, what roles may change, and what training may be required, and whether new dependencies are being created. The mindset changes from what does this action do to what happens next. So, moving on to the next slide. Suppose we automate a repetitive task, the short term effect is positive, time is saved. Over the medium term, roles may change. Over the long term, new skills may become necessary because the work system has changed. So, there may also be an unintended effect like such a new training requirement or dependence on one tool. The point is not to avoid automation. The point is to make the decision with a full set of consequences in mind. I will make a quick consequence map before major decision. What happens now, what happens later, and what could happen unexpectedly. So my takeaway is a good action today can create very different effects tomorrow. Thank you,
Um,
Omji. Over to you for identifying leverage points.
Thank you, Priya. If anyone would like to comment on it before we move
Yeah,
on to Omji, please feel
yeah,
free
yeah.
to comment.
Actually, I like the point about unintended consequences because sometimes we look at an action and only see the immediate benefit. For example, automation might save time initially, but later it could change the skills people need or create dependence on a particular tool, and those effects could eventually create another cycle in the system. So I think it's important to not to ask not just what happens now, but also what might this lead to.
Thank you, Antareep. Next, we'll move on to Omji's presentation.
Thank you, Priya. My habit is identify leverage point. Using system structure to find a small change with a large effect. Not every action has the same impact. In a complex system, a small changes at the right point can produce a much larger improvement than a large amount of effort elsewhere. The slide gives three steps. Observe how the system currently works, locate the high impact point, and then act on the right part of the structure. For a student, this is useful because we sometimes respond to performance problem by solving working longer, but the real problem may be a bottleneck, repeat rework, poor scheduling, or an avoidable time leak. So I want to replace how can I work harder with where the leverage point. Okay, move to the next slide. Uh, okay. Imagine a student feels there is a never enough time to study. First, track time. Second, find leakage. Perhaps context switching, fragment study sessions, or repeat rework. Third, identify root causes. Then choose the leverage action. That action could be moving a recurring distraction outside a high focus block, batching repetitive work, or improving planning before starting. The result is more learning time. So simply more time is spent working. This shows why system thinking is different from simple productivity. We change the structure that generates the problem. My reminder will be right action. at the right point can create maximum impact with minimum effort. Thank you, Antareep. I will pass it to circular cause and effect.
Thank you, Omji. So before we move on, anyone wants to add anything?
I have a comment to Omji. So I think this is a really practical habit because we often respond to a problem by just putting in more effort. The student time example makes that clear. If someone doesn't have enough time studying for more hours, maybe may not solve the actual problems if the time is being lost through distractions or repeated work. So finding that one point where we can make a change can be much more effective, right?
Yeah, thank you. So next we'll move on to Antareep's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Omji. So my selected habit is identify the circular nature of complex cause and effect relationships. So in simple problems, we think A causes B, but many systems behave differently, where A affects B, B affects C, and eventually the result comes back and affects A. So this slide captures this through. So effect, feedback, and loop. So this is useful for recurring students and project problems because the system can recreate the same issue even after we treat one symptom. So I want to ask basically, so is this problem repeating because the system is feeding it back into itself? And if yes, the intervention should target the loop up rather than only one point. So if we could move to the next slide. Yeah. So the loop begins with high workload. High workload reduces test rest. Less rest leads to lower focus, and lower focus creates more mistakes. So, and more mistakes create more rework, and more rework returns us to higher workload. So the loop is self-reinforcing. So a single symptom fix may not last. Systems thinking intervention can target the structure, improve planning, so workload peaks are reduced, set realistic goals, or reduce rework by improving early decisions. And my practical habit will be to sketch a loop where whenever I see a recurring issue and ask where can the loop be weakened or broken. Thank you, Gaurav. Now over to you for recognized time delays.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next person, does anyone want to add anything to Antareep's presentation?
Yeah, I might like to add what you said about workload is I think all of us can relate to. What I think was interesting about it is that the workload itself creates more workload. So if there is less rest and there is less to focus on, which leads to mistakes and more rework. So it's not really one problem. It's one problem causing another. The whole thing keeps feeding in this vicious loop. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Thank you. Next we'll move on to Gaurav.
Thank you, Andre. The habit I have selected is recognize the time delay. The basic idea is simple. The result of an action does not always come immediately. Sometimes we take an action today, but the system needs some time to respond before we can see the actual result. So we can think of it as action, delay, result. The important part is the delay in between. The problem is that we often judge our decision based on what we see immediately. If we don't see any improvement, we may think that our approach is wrong and change is too quickly. But the real problem may simply be that we have not given it enough time. Change to next slide. Simple, simple example is learning a new study method. Suppose I change my study method today. In week one, I may not see any major improvement. And by week three, I may start understanding the concept better. And by week six, I may finally see a clear improvement in my presentation. So the process is new method, practice, time delay, improvement. If I judge the method only in week one, I might stop something that could actually work. This is why I think only useful question to ask is how long should this realistically take to show a result? But recognizing time delay does not mean that we should blindly continue something. we will stand to check whether we seeing small sign of process. For example, in learning, I can look at whether I understand concept better, make fewer mistakes, or solve questions faster, even before my final mark improve. I can use the same idea in my academic project. When I starting learning a new skill or trying a new approach, I should not expect a major result immediately. I should give it a reasonable amount of time and monitor the progress along the way. To make this is a habit, I plan to three things. First, set reasonable time period before judging an action. Second, track small sign of progress instead of looking only at the final result. Third, if the expected result has not happened, first ask whether there is a time delay before deciding that the approach has failed. So my main takeaways, don't judge a useful action too early. Give the system enough time to respond while still checking whether it is moving in the right direction. Thank you. Srutanik, over to you.
Um, Thank you, Gaurav. Before we move on, anyone wants to add anything?
Yeah, I want to add one point to Gaurav. That is about time delays that we discussed. Time delays can make us mistake whether something is actually working or not. Or if you try a new study method and don't see a result in the first week, we might just conclude that it doesn't work. So, but the result may take longer to show up. So, I think we need to be careful about judging an action too early, and also have to think about when we should actually measure its effect. So that's I want to add.
Okay. Thank you. Next we can move on to Srutanik's presentation.
My selected habit is pay attention to accumulations and their rates of change. So there are systems that contain things that build over time. So that is what's accumulating, right? That there are aspects of stock in, stock, rate in, and rate out. So the current level of something that is only the current level is only the picture. We also need to know how quickly it is growing, or in the fact shrinking. For example, knowledge is an accumulation. Learning hours add to it. um, Distractions can reduce effective learning. So, in academic question, how much do I know in a day or in this day is not really the point we are need to focus on, but rather what rate of learning or practice is changing my knowledge over time. So, um, please next slide. The skill accumulation part is where we consider the sequence that is learning hours, the knowledge, the practice, the projects, and the career readiness. So these are not isolated events, they form an accumulation process. So learning hours contribute to knowledge, and knowledge becomes useful for practice, and practice helps us make it effective in our careers. So the curve in that curve, the curve may look like it's slow, but it has consistent inputs which can lead to much longer results or outcomes later on. So therefore, I would like to monitor the rate behind this accumulation. For example, the learning hours or the project practice, instead of judging the progress on the single final outcome of the project. And therefore, my takeaway would be to see the small consistent inputs that and understand that it can create much larger accumulated outcomes. So that would be it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Srutanik. Would anyone like to add anything to his presentation?
I think this connect very naturally with the time delay and accumulation. For example, in learning, we put in a small amount of effort regularly, but we don't always see a big change immediately. The knowledge and the practice are building up in the background. So if we only look at today result, we might miss the fact that the accumulation is actually happening. That is why both time and consistency matter when we judge an intervention.
Yeah, actually, we all the point was we have to make consistent efforts. We should not look like it. We should not like uh, it's a basic example like small drops fill the big bucket. So consistent efforts um, give useful what you can say useful outcomes in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Gaurav and Samir. Next, we'll move on to Shantanu's presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Srutanik. My selected habit is make meaningful connections within and between systems. So parts inside a system influence one another, and different system can also interact with each other. If we understand only one part, we may miss the relationship that actually matters between them. I want to develop two questions here. One is what is connected within the systems, and the other is what other systems influence it. This is the useful in academic and professional development because a student problem rarely has a single dimension. Uh, Time management can affect project work as well. Team coordination can affect technical progress. Technology choices can affect learning. Communication can affect all of them. So meaningful connection help us see patterns that are invisible when we look at each issue separately. Moving on to the second slide. So imagine an academic problem in isolation. We might describe it as a technical issue, a time issue, or even a team issue. Now connect it to the surrounding systems like team, time, technology, communication, and their career goals. Suddenly, the problem has more dimensions, but also more possible solutions to solve. Yet, a technical problem may actually be caused by unclear coordination. A time problem may be caused by a poor workflow. A project difficulty may reveal a skill gap related to future career goals, right? My practical habit will be to make a small connection map, whether I face a complex problem or identify the people, processes, resources, and other systems that could influence the outcome, and ask which connection gives the most useful perspective. Together, the nine habits give us a
Sorry.
broader way to think, see the bigger system, question assumptions, consider consequences, understand loops and delays, identify leverage, watch accumulations, and make meaningful connections. So yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you. I will now hand the question back to discussion back to Neha.
Thank you, Shantanu. This was our last presentation for the day. Is there anyone who would like to add something to his presentation?
I think this habit bring together a lot of what we have discussed. Like a problem may look technical at first, but when we connect it with the team, time, communication, or technology, we may see a different reason for it. So instead of looking at issues separately, we can understand how they influence each other and find better solutions. So yeah, that from myself.
Yeah. Thank you, Kashan. So, thank you, everyone. We've heard from all nine members, and I think what stood out the most is that although everyone chose a different habit, the ideas were actually quite connected. So, we're done with today's presentations, and I'll give a quick summary of our discussion today. So, first, we started with see the big picture, which is really about taking a step back and then making sure that we're not looking at the problem in a very narrow way. And then we saw surface and test assumptions, which reminded us that even when we understand the problem, our explanation could be based on assumptions that we haven't actually tested out in a real world scenario. And this again naturally it connects to consider issues fully, where instead of immediately deciding what a problem is or what the solution should be, all of us can take a little more time to look at all the facts, the alternatives, and various different perspectives. Something else we can notice is that a lot of these habits are really about just looking in beyond the immediate result. So we can, for example, the understand the consequences of actions. It's really asks us to think about how our decisions, what our decisions might create later, the consequences it could lead to. Whereas the recognized time delays, it also reminds us that we may not see the result of a particular action immediately. Then we have habits that help us understand why problems continue or they grow. So, circular cause and effect, they showed how One problem can feed back into another and create a repeating cycle. Accumulations and rate of change. It also gave us another way of looking at change by, and it showed us how to focus on what builds up over time and how quickly that starts changing. And also, lastly, we looked at identify leverage points, which is particularly practical because it changes the question we ask. So instead of just thinking how can I put in more effort, there is also the question of where would my effort make the biggest difference. And then lastly, we saw make meaningful connections, which brought a lot of these ideas together. So a problem that looks like it belongs to any one area, it might actually be influenced by several other parts of the system, like the people involved, the processes, technology, time, communication, or the longer term goals. So, looking at all the presentations together, I think the system thinking, it's less about having one perfect method for solving a problem, but more about developing a habit of pausing before reacting. So, what we can take away from today's discussion is that a problem can look very different depending on where we draw the boundary, what assumptions we make, and how far ahead we're looking into, and what relationships we notice. And what makes these habits useful is that we don't necessarily need to stop and create a complicated analysis every time something goes wrong, but sometimes simply asking a better question before making a decision can change the way we approach an entire solution. So, to summarize, finally, we've arrived at this point that you shouldn't just react to a problem in front of you. Instead, you take a step back, you understand the system around it, and then decide where and how to act. So, thank you everyone for your participation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.